Today we are watching this documentary series named The History of Christianity, found in the public domain, public access. Shown are the icons to verify that. It is free for non-commercial use, etc. So it should not generate a copyright strike, infringement, copyright claim, etc. Even for its music soundtrack. We have cut off the introductory music just in case. And this, our video in regards to this documentary series, is shown for educational purposes alone. There is a rather long description of what's contained in this video below it. It's too long, so we might just make it a audio video in part 2 of this video. See, it's very, very long. They've almost written the gospel around it. Let's begin. We're going to ad-lib or give some information where we see fit, if their statements are wrong or in error, false or other.
This audio recording is brought to you free of charge. We invite you to visit our website to take a look at the theological and historical resources we have available for download.
This is an excerpt from A Short History of the Early Church by Harry R. Bohr. Chapter 1, The World of the Early Church. The Christian church was born in a world that was already old. Great empires had risen and fallen. The glories of Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Greece lay centuries in the past. Now it was Rome, the greatest of the ancient empires, that governed the civilized world. It was almost exclusively in that empire that the Christian church lived the first 5 centuries of its life.
So what he's saying there is, he's specifically talking about the Roman church, the empirical state church of Constantine, etc., who decreed Christianity a law, basically illegal. It went from illegal to legal, so there's no more persecutions of Christians, etc. They were free to practice, but they were under this Roman church, empirical church. So Constantine, etc., did mix their pagan gods, Mithra, etc., with the stories of Jesus, etc. And Constantine, etc., by decree through the Roman senators, said, you have to follow this, our decree, that you are divine, that you are of the gods, that you are a god. So Constantine, etc., began to brag and say he was Apollo. Oh, actually, I'm better than Apollo, and he made these statues of him riding a chariot. According to the video documentary by Jovovich, of the timeline guy, the Dutch Jew guy, and this lady that actually looked at that Arch of Triumph and made comparisons to his vision of him putting a cross on his shield, etc., to conquer in the name of Christ. Okay, it wasn't there. It had these other pagan gods, all that sort of stuff. So what this Constantine and these so-called Roman Christians, especially the soldiers, did was they had a mass or a church building where everybody went and worshipped, but underneath they were in secretive worshipping Mithra, etc. Instead of having a cross or a T, sign of Tammuz, they had an X and all this sort of stuff. So that's what they're talking about, the Roman state church, the mother church that they wanted everybody to be under. So they, like Constantine did, invade different places and stress that they come under them. They drop all their beliefs, get rid of their texts, etc., etc., denounce and convert to that church, or else they'll be put through tortures, killed, and their texts, etc., would either be seized or destroyed, or these people would be also burned at the stake, and so forth. Many submitted, Many didn't, like the Waldenses, etc. So these Romans wiped them out.
Before beginning a discussion of the history of the church, it is important to know briefly the main characteristics of the world in which it developed. In doing so, mention should be made of the Roman Empire, the Jewish background of the church, the influence of Greek thought, and the various kinds of religion that Christianity found in its environment. The Roman Empire. The Christian church was born in the Roman Empire. This great and powerful commonwealth stretched from England to Persia and from the Sahara to northwestern Germany.
Again, he's talking about the Roman Catholic Church, or the Roman State Church, the Empirical Church, not those outside of it, okay? Whether they be the Waldenses, etc., etc. It's talking about the Roman Catholic Church and those adherents to it that came later, like Martin Luther, Wycliffe, etc. They were Protestants, or Protestants, if you like to call them that, the early ones, who saw that the Roman Catholic Church needed to make a reform. So they protested. They said, you've got to change some things because it's wrong. So that's why we are referring to them as Protestants. And then a sect of them didn't agree with the Mother Church anymore, so they broke away, and they eventually became the Protestant movement, who in modern times still cling to the Mother Church through their garb or their dress, their practices, their rites, their rituals. They are still attached to that Mother Church. Like the Seventh-day Adventists, who said, no, they're of the devil, all this sort of stuff, according to the Bible. But one of their leaders years ago went to see the Pope and was overheard saying, well, it's His Majesty, His Honour, etc., and he would have kissed his ring. Well, he would have, to get the finance for those hospitals that they were building.
The Mediterranean Sea was not then, as it is now, a sea touching the shores of many nations. It was rather a great inland waterway uniting the many provinces of the empire that surrounded it on all sides. Hundreds of tribes lived within Rome's borders, and nations with a history far longer than that of Rome were under its control. The center of the empire was the city of Rome, and in Rome all the power of government was in the hands of the emperor. Number 1, growth. At the birth of Jesus, Rome was about 750 years old. It had been founded as a small village on the banks of the Tiber River in western Italy. It grew to become a town, a city, and a small state. By means of wars and treaties with neighboring states, it continued to expand. In 265 BC, 500 years after its founding, Rome was master of the Italian peninsula. It then reached out westward, across the sea. In less than 100 years, it had conquered the islands of Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, the powerful state of Carthage in North Africa, and much of Spain. Thereupon it turned eastward and northward. It conquered all the remaining lands around the Mediterranean Sea, all of Gaul to the north and parts of modern Germany. In the course of this expansion, Palestine came under the control of the empire in 63 BC and became a province in the empire in 86. Number 2, government. Until 27 BC, all Rome's territories were administered by a form of government known as a republic. In it, the Roman Senate was very powerful, and no single individual controlled the government. In 27 BC, however, after disastrous civil wars lasting more than 100 years, the full power of Rome was given into the hands of Gaius Octavianus, the nephew of Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul and one of the greatest Romans. Octavianus is known in history as Caesar Augustus, first and greatest of the emperors. With him, the Republic ended and the empire began. He reigned from 27 BC to AD 14. He is this.
That's incorrect, because the people cried out for a republic. He came from one of his missions, according to the histories, and started it up again. So it probably died when he died. We believe that's incorrect, according to the history books.
Caesar, of whom it is written in Luke chapter 2, verse 1. In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled. Except for some fighting at the frontiers of the empire, the reign of peace begun by Augustus lasted more than 200 years. It was during these 2 centuries that the Church, arising out of the life and work of our Lord, became an empire-wide witness to the gospel. Number 3, boundaries. The boundaries of the empire were clear. On the west, its boundary was the Atlantic Ocean. From the Alps to the North Sea, the Rhine River separated Gaul from the unconquered Germany. Rising in southwestern Germany, not far from the source of the Rhine, the Danube River flowed eastward to the Black Sea. It protected the empire from the barbarian tribes to the north. In the east, the boundary was the Persian Empire. In the south, below the long, fertile strip along the North African coast, the Sahara Desert bounded the empire. Except for a few variations, especially in the east, because of the wars with Persia, these boundaries were maintained for more than 4 centuries. Number 4, Pax Romana. In this vast empire, the Pax Romana, Roman peace, made trade and travel both easy and safe. By land, sea, and river, it was possible to travel from one end of the empire to the other. It also encouraged the development of culture in every way, leading to great achievements in literature, architecture, and sculpture. The study of law was greatly developed. The economy provided varying degrees of prosperity throughout the empire. Everywhere, the Roman army was a symbol of Roman power, Roman law, and Roman peace. Not least, there was a common language, Greek, in which one could communicate in the larger part of the empire. A careful reading of the book of Acts will reveal many of the characteristics of the Roman Empire mentioned in this section. The Jewish background. The roots of the Christian church reach back deeply into the history and religion of Israel. Salvation, said Jesus, is from the Jews, John 4:22. Jesus came not to destroy, but to fulfill the law and the prophets, Matthew 5:17. Those who belong to Christ are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise, Galatians 3:29. As Palestine was part of the Roman Empire, so the church is related, and very deeply so, to Israel, the people of Palestine. The earliest church was wholly Jewish, her Savior was a Jew, and the entire New Testament was probably written by Jews. It would therefore be useful to take brief note of Israel's history.
Yeah, the Old Testament obviously would have been spoken, traditionally recited to their people, the Hebrews, the Chaldeans, then the Israelites, and so forth. Then you'd have the New Testament, where a bunch of Galilean fishermen, their trade was to go out in boats with nets and catch fish to feed their local village, themselves and their family, and probably others. So that's all they knew. So they spoke Galilean. They were under the Jewish Mosaic law, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, etc. So they did what was deemed Mosaic law. And then this teacher comes along, this Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, Jesus the Christ, and he basically exposes them and says, well, you know, they're like snakes, etc., etc. They're pompous, they like wearing the lovely clothing, they like to sit in the very front of festivals or feasts, they like to announce that they're walking down the street, you know, with trumpets, all that sort of stuff, and they're basically closing up the gates to the kingdom of heaven for the people, so they're steering everybody wrong. So he was exposing them, as did John prior to him coming to be baptized. He said, you snakes, why have you, who told you to come, you know, all this sort of stuff. So these Galileans who had this teacher heard everything and saw everything that this Messiah, this Jesus the Messiah, Jesus the Christ, Yeshua Mashiach, saw, they heard and did, right, miracles, etc. And somebody amongst them wrote it all down in the Galilean Aramaic. Galilean Aramaic is akin to Koine Greek. These are long dead, no longer spoken or written languages. There might be a few old as people out there that can still speak it, but they're far and few in between, and plus they don't know how to speak today's English, so they wouldn't be able to translate it for you into the English, okay, if it's not their second language. So everybody in the Syriac Church of the East, etc., supposedly or possibly use a modern vernacular, okay, whether it be modern Galilean Aramaic or the modern Syriac or Koine Greek, which is supposedly related or akin to that ancient Galilean Aramaic. But the Koine Greek is an old, dead language that's probably not used anymore. So your Greek, that everyone's saying, oh yeah, it's coming from the original Greek or this sort of stuff. Maybe it's not. We believe it's not. It's probably coming from a Latinized form of Greek. Okay? Latinized, being it's of the Vatican. Okay? It's been changed. It's like this. You have the Latin and you have the Greek. Okay? So if you have Mesopotamia, the end suffix, is it? Suffix or prefix, IA or IE, IC, is an indication from the Latin Greek that Mesopotamia belonged to. There's some people that were living in that land, so they possessed that land. They were in that land. They basically owned it, or they had these texts which were in Aramaic, Syriac, that obviously were theirs. So that's the difference there. So today with the Hebrew, they're not giving you the original ancient very old tablet. Ivri, as many of them claim, is actually the modern Israeli Hebrew, revised around early 1900s or thereafter. And it's supposed to go back to the Ugaritic or the Canaanites, when Abraham's descendants or Abraham etc. went into the land of Canaan and they dwelt there. Eventually they abandoned God, turned their back on God, and started to embrace the Canaanite religion, the pagan idols, El, Baal, possibly Yahweh, etc. Okay, and somewhere along the way somebody scripted the name of God wrong, so that's why you've got their pagan god El, pushed by different Jews, etc., etc. Right? Their scriptures, their texts, whatever. When the original name was in the Aramaic Hebrew, or the Hebrew Aramaic, was El, E-I-L. Okay? So that's what people got to be aware of. Got to be very, very careful that these people today, rabbis, etc., are using all the teachings of their beloved rabbis that came before. They had these ideas, these thoughts. Well, this possibly what it means. This is what it means, and they venerate that guy, right? Rabbi, whatever his name is. Yeah. So they push his thoughts, his ideas.
Number 1, David to Alexander. The kingdom of Israel was founded by David, the son of Jesse, in about 1000 BC. He reigned until about 960 BC.
Okay, so specifically saying that the kingdom of Israel was founded by David. Yeah, okay, we'll go with that. But originally Jacob was given this name Israel or Israel by God. So he had his name changed. So they probably at that point they were just a tribe, and then it grew, and then it became a kingdom with David.
David placed such a stamp on the kingdom and upon the kingly office that he became a symbol of Israel's later messianic hopes. After the death of his son Solomon in about 930 BC, the kingdom David had established was split into two parts. The northern part, called Israel, was taken into Assyrian exile in 721 BC. It was never restored. The southern kingdom, Judah, which had remained true to the house of David, had a longer history. In 586 BC, however, it too went into exile in Babylon. In 539, Cyrus, king of Persia, conquered Babylon. He allowed any exile who wished to return to Jerusalem to do so.
So why did these two tribes go into exile? That's why you got to look at the scriptures. You got to see why. Because God said, "These are my precepts, these are my principles, morals, whatever. These are my commands, as my chosen nation or tribe, peoples, who will eventually go and tell all about me to these non-Jews, these Goyim, these Romans, whoever, right? These other nations, these heathens. You have to follow this, you have to do this, you have to do that." So, them being rebellious, said, we don't want anyone telling us what to do anymore, we want to do our own thing. So they turned their back on God, right? And they maybe accepted the people in the land where there were dwellings, religion, cult, or whatever, pagan gods, practices, and all that sort of stuff. So he says, right, you've turned your back on me and you've gone against what I said, so you're going to face my wrath. So you are accursed. You keep doing it, so you're cursed for a certain period, right? So he says, I'm going to bring these people to you, they're going to invade you, they're going to put you into exile, they're going to take you as slaves. So they go there, and then after a while, say 10 years later, when they're on the point of forgiveness, they decide to return back to God. So obviously he forgives them, etc., right? Brings them back as his people. And he tells them again, you must obey me, you must follow my commandments, etc., whatever I set you. So they did for a while, but then they decide, well, we're going to rebel again. Yeah, we don't want to be told what to do. They kept doing it. Okay? So he says, right, that's it, had enough. This is going to happen to you again, and that's it, right? No more you, or very little you. So then he gives that to the Judeans, the tribe of Judah. Right? He tells them, you follow these commandments, you follow these precepts, morals, whatever I set you, etc., etc. And eventually they decide to rebel, turn their back on him and follow these other people's gods, pagan gods, their customs, all that sort of stuff. So they go through the same process. So eventually God gets sick of that. He says, right, you're not listening. Okay, I'm going to send these people to you, and they're going to invade you, they're going to take you into slavery for so long, and you're basically under my wrath, under my curse for that period, right? So they end up going to somewhere like Babylon, and King there says, no, none of those religious stuff, you can't practice any of that. And that's why they were sitting at the side of the river of Babylon and crying, we wept because we remember, when we remember Babylon, right? Etc., etc. So eventually, probably near God's forgiveness after a period of 10 years or so, they are rescued by someone who's set by God as, he's not a believer, God's just chosen him to go and rescue those people from exile and take them to his country, i.e. It'll be someone like Cyrus to Persia, and there he says, yeah, okay, you can do all your religious practices, do this, do that, etc. There are others who are doing their thing. So he also said, like this person said, according to the histories, a lot of them were allowed to go back to Israel because the temple was destroyed, etc. He would fund them, give them the materials and stuff, and they'd go back and they'll repair their temple. Some of them did, some of them didn't. So eventually lots more go back, and these probably being Pharisees who spoke Farsi, okay, that Persian language, probably adopted some of their customs, all that sort of stuff, their ideas, became power mad, and obviously they became that sect, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, etc., that had dominion over the peoples there, okay, under the oppression of these Romans. The Romans were their masters, whom they didn't really like, but they sucked up, because I guess they were allowed to do all this stuff. The Romans said you can do all this sort of stuff, blah blah blah. Okay, so even though they resented the Romans, they were given that chance to do that sort of thing. This is just what we found from the histories. Okay, so these controllers of the people were not teaching them according really to their Mosaic law. They're too harsh, too many laws, right? They put out too many laws. Your poor animal, your oxen is drowning in the mud, right? It's stuck in the mud. You can't pull them out because it's the Sabbath. So you got to leave it there, and the thing will probably die, right? Or it's in a creek or something like that, in a river, and it's like rivers rising and something like that. You can't pull out because you're not allowed to. It's because it's Sabbath day. So you got to leave it there, and the thing drowns. That was your prized oxen that probably would plough your field or something like that, right? So this Christ comes along and he says, "Come on, man, use your common sense, your logic, reasoning. Use your brain. That's your oxen that's going to plough your field or make some crops or whatever, feed your people, whatever. You got to leave it in the river or the mud to die. You're going to have to plough that whole field yourself. Near impossible. Hard work. You probably could do it, but you maybe not create these harvests, in time, all that sort of stuff, right? He's basically saying to use your brain. Like they walked through this field and they were hungry, so they simply picked some wheat heads or whatever, right? And they chewed on that. And these Pharisees were trying to catch him out on anything and everything, right? Ooh, they picked this wheat heads and they ate it on the Sabbath. Ooh, this is stuff, Christ says, you ain't got me, bro, because remember David snuck into the temple and he ate the offering or something because he was hungry. If you're hungry, you're starving to death, are you going to let a rule drive you towards starvation? Okay, no. You're going to. Basic instinct is you're going to try to survive. You're going to try and live on. So you steal. Okay, so okay. It's a sin. It's a crime, but possibly not in the sense where you're starving to death. You pinch some food to stay alive. Okay, that's one of those things that's Christ, by the sounds of it, overlooked. Right? It's still a sin, but hey, I understand because the guy was hungry. The person was hungry. They need to eat, right? And then you'd probably give them an apple or something like that. Okay, let's continue.
The following year, a number of them returned to their native land. These returnees, in time, rebuilt the temple which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had destroyed. After the first return, other groups went back to Palestine. One of their leaders was Ezra, a priest who was deeply devoted to the Mosaic Law. It was his strong desire to make the observance of the Torah, Israel's law, a living part of Jewish religion again. The Pharisees, whom we meet so often in the Gospels and the book of Acts, grew out of the movement to restore the law that Ezra had begun. Between 334 and 323 BC, Alexander, the young Macedonian king, conquered all lands east of Greece up to India and as far south as Egypt. When he died in 323 BC, his generals divided among themselves the empire he had created. Ptolemy became ruler of Egypt. His area of authority included Palestine, and it remained under the authority of his house until 198 BC. In that year, the house that he had descended from another general, Seleucus, gained control of Palestine. The Seleucids governed Syria, much of Asia Minor, and all of Persia. This change in the government of Palestine had very great consequences for the Jewish people. Number 2, the Maccabees. The Ptolemaic kings had permitted the Jews to practice their religion freely. For more than 250 years after the return from exile, the Jews had observed the Mosaic law as Ezra had taught it to them. Now their new masters pressed them to surrender their ancient religion and follow Greek ways. The leader of this movement was Antiochus IV, Seleucid king of Syria. He came to the throne in 175 BC. When the Jews resisted his policies, riots and massacres resulted. The Jewish religion was forbidden. Greek religion was enforced. Prostitutes were brought into the temple, and Jewish ceremony was prohibited, especially circumcision.
So these, according to the histories that we found, were male prostitutes. Yeah. They're not saying male, they're just saying prostitutes. So you get the idea, they're women. Okay. But apparently, according to the histories, maybe even the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, etc., they were males on hand.
Most offensive of all, the Torah was openly burnt. The rebellion against Seleucid rule that now broke out in full strength, 163 BC, was led by an aged priest named Mattathias and his 4 sons. Of these, Judas was the leader. Together, they are known as the Maccabees, that is, men who fight violently. In 141, the Jews gained complete victory over their Seleucid enemies, and for the first time since 586 BC, Israel again became an independent nation. She kept her freedom only 80 years. In 63 BC, civil war in Palestine gave occasion to Rome to establish her authority there. For the next 60 years, Israel was semi-independent, her rulers being appointed by Rome. In 37 BC, Herod, known as Herod the Great, during whose reign Jesus was born, became king with Rome's approval. After his death, the kingdom was divided among his sons. Archelaus received Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. Herod Antipas received Galilee and Perea. Philip received the area northeast of Galilee. In AD 6,